Thanks, Andrew. Well, good evening, everyone. Good to be back. First tonight, the Albanese government has deprioritised national security. They've kicked the intelligence chiefs out of the National Security Committee of Cabinet as permanent members. They've ordered Australia's top intelligence official to do a climate change review, which he had to juggle while dealing with a terror threat. And yet all they can do is now blame Elon Musk for the rise in violent extremism that we're seeing. This is a joke. We should hardly be surprised by the major breaking news this afternoon that police uncovered an alleged teenage terror cell that they believed posed a threat requiring immediate action. New South Wales Police and the AFP arrested 7 people in major raids today, another 5 helping with police inquiries. This investigation was sparked by the violent stabbing attack 10 days ago of Bishop Ma Murray Emanuel. Police say the alleged offender shares an extremist ideology with the 7 others that were arrested today.
As part of our JCTT investigation into the alleged Wakely stabbing, we identified links between the alleged offender and a network of associates and peers who we believe shared a similar violent extremist ideology.
And the police said they had to carry out the raids because they couldn't guarantee they'd be able to stop future terror attacks. Well, the raids kicked off at 11 o'clock this morning and involved more than 400 police. The anti-terror police swooped on 13 homes across southwest Sydney. And most of the 7 arrested, and this is highly concerning, they're between 15 and 17 years old. School students.
It was considered that the group, subject of our attention, posed an unacceptable risk and threat to the people of New South Wales, and our current purely investigative strategies could not adequately ensure public safety. As a result, we determined that we needed to escalate our activities and that overt action was required. Their behaviour, whilst under that surveillance, led us to believe that if they were to commit any act, we would not be able to prevent that.
And that's New South Wales Police Deputy Commissioner Dave Hudson. He said police would have liked more time to conduct their investigation, but ultimately they had to strike early. They had to put public safety first. He reminded us that in New Zealand, individuals had committed acts of terror even while they were under police surveillance. So this was clearly a warning that police here had to act instead of wait.
If you take your minds back to Auckland in New Zealand when surveillance was on an individual who attacked people in a shopping centre.
The suspected youth terror cell was only uncovered after the alleged terror attack against Bishop Ma Murray Emanuel at Christ the Good Shepherd Church in Wakely last Monday night. Now, the 7 arrested today are, according to police, peers and associates of the 16-year-old who's been charged with that offence. They've been under surveillance in recent days, and police fear they share the same violent extremist ideology of the alleged knifeman. ASIO boss Mike Burgess today said that counter-terror investigations are increasingly focused on young people. Young people. He said they're a vulnerable cohort and social media, one element that's to blame.
Unfortunately, there's been a growing number of minors in our counter-terrorism caseload. That did peak a couple of years ago to 50% of our priority counter-terrorism caseload. It dropped off again for a while, but it's picked up again.
But still, the terror threat level hasn't been raised. It's currently at possible. Well, the ASIO boss today said that this means there's a 50% chance of a terror attack in the next 12 months. 50%.
The most likely attack will come from an individual or a small group of individuals that go to violence with little or no warning. There is a range of ideologies, violent extremist ideologies that are drivers in the environment, religiously motivated. Sunni violent extremism is the principal in that concern, but a few years ago we had a Christian violent extremist attack in this country. And on the ideological side, the principal group is neo-Nazis, nationalist and racist violent extremists. but there are a range of individuals, including people with conspiracy theories, so it can come from a range of ideologies and it can happen quickly.
We've seen that the Albanese government has deprioritised national security. We've seen that clearly. I broke the story on this show that they'd kicked the boss of ASIO and ASIS out of their premier national security body. And yet, all they can do is blame Elon Musk for this rise in extremism we're seeing. They're not taking a hard look at themselves, and you have to wonder why. I'm going to come back to this with my panel in a moment with Michael Kroger and Michael Danby. Also tonight, American college campus anti-Semitism has come now to Australia as University of Sydney students chant calls for a global intifada. Have a listen. Intifada! 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 I've got a lot more to say about that after the break, and I want to know what the former ABC boss Mark Scott, who is now Vice-Chancellor at the University of Sydney, is doing about this clear rise in anti-Semitism on campus. Chants for intifada are horrific. Now, the chiefs of ASIO say that social media is letting criminals and terrorism flourish unhindered. Also tonight, pressure mounts on Labor as inflation drops, but not quite enough to curb another rate rise. And academics say that the Gazan death count is statistically impossible. This according to a new study. One of those academics will join me later in the hour to tell us how he used Hamas's own data to debunk their casualty figures. But now let's look at this shocking case of a serious failure of our justice laws that has directly led to the death of a young mother. This is such an extreme failure that New South Wales Premier Chris Minns has launched an urgent review into bail laws. This after the horrific death of young mum Molly Ticehurst, allegedly at the hands of her ex-partner. And Molly's ex-partner was released on bail after being charged with an array of serious offences that allegedly related to her.
It's alleged he raped his former partner, Molly Ticehurst, 3 times in January and March this year after their relationship ended. He's also accused of stalking and harassing the 28-year-old mother, damaging her property and targeting her pet puppy in an act of animal cruelty. He was released on bail with strict conditions and an apprehended violence order.
You have to ask, how could the alleged offender be let out on bail when he'd been arrested and charged with rape and stalking, all those offences? And yet, 15 days after he was let out on bail, he allegedly killed Molly. This is beyond appalling. Well, Chris Minns today rightly ordered a review of bail laws.
To put it simply, there are serious questions for the New South Wales government to answer as to how this alleged offender was out on bail. I mean, the system's clearly let down Molly. The status quo isn't working, and we need to be looking at change to keep vulnerable people safe, particularly as they're awaiting justice.
The reality is she would still be alive if he, the alleged offender, was not out on bail. Let's bring in now former New South Wales Deputy Police Commissioner and former head of Counter-terrorism and Special Tactics Unit, Mick Willing. Mick, thank you very much for joining us tonight. Look, this is such an appalling case. A young mum badly let down by our justice system. What's gone wrong here?
I think there are far too many women who are losing their lives as a result of domestic and family violence. So we know that, and I think that a review into the bail laws in this case is certainly welcome. I note that the Bail Act Monitoring Group will be involved. That includes police and Department of Justice and other specialists as well. But anything we can do to ensure that vulnerable people, particularly women, not only feel safe but are safe should be a welcome thing.
Mick, you are the head of counter-terrorism for New South Wales Police. You are also the Deputy Police Commissioner. We learned today in a major operation that there was a teenage terror cell only uncovered after the church attack just last Monday. But I have to ask, given the alleged offender of the Wakeley church attack had moved schools, he'd been suspended, he'd been arrested for knife crime. Should police have known about this radicalisation earlier?
Well, Sharri, in hindsight, that's a difficult question to answer, I guess. But, what they've done today shows that they are completely throwing every resource at this. 400 police officers, 13 search warrants executed, 7 arrests, 5 people or young people who are assisting police with inquiries. It's a significant investigation and a major step forward today. It's always difficult to work out when to interdict. There is always a tension between evidence gathering and ensuring that public safety exists, and public safety must always override staying or making decisions to forego arrests and the like during the course of an investigation. And in this case, I think the deputy commissioners that appeared at the press conference today made it very clear that there was an unacceptable risk to the public. So they've taken action, and I commend all of the resources that are involved in that particular investigation today, which is going to be ongoing.
Yeah, and as you say, 400 police, a huge effort. We are yet to learn any details of if there was an alleged plot, what it was about. I presume that will come in the next few days. Mick Willing, really appreciate your time tonight. Let's bring in now tonight's panel, former Victoria Liberal Party President Michael Kroger and former Labor MP Michael Danby. Great to see you both tonight, the two Michaels. Michael Kroger, what are your thoughts on the teenage terror cell and the breakdown in social cohesion we're seeing, and in particular, the fact that all the government can seem to do is blame Elon Musk for it, when we've been on this show for months, basically for 7 months, saying that they're not showing enough leadership to keep Australians together, to stop extremism from rising?
Well, that's exactly right, Sharri. It's extremely concerning, and I wasn't much comforted by Mike Burgess, the head of ASIO, this afternoon, who talked about the problem being, radical Sunni Islam and Christianity being the problem. I should remind Mr Burgess that Iran, Hezbollah and the Houthis are not Sunnis, they're Shia. So I don't know how much he actually knows about this. I presume he does know that, but I thought it was a rather weak performance. Let's call out this for what it is. This young kid is Islamic, he's a Muslim, and Muslim extremism is the problem in this country today. It's not Christianity, it's not Islamophobia. I mean, where's the rise? I haven't seen any rabbis calling for the killing of Muslims in any...
God forbid.
In any synagogue since October 7. This is an absurd debate we're having. This is not a real world debate. It's like we're on another planet. It's ships passing in the night. The problem throughout the Western world is the hatred of Jews, which has been uncovered by what's happened since October 7. All of these Jew-hating and neo-Nazis have crawled out from under their rocks. We didn't realise there, but they've been there since 1947, 1948, sitting, waiting for an opportunity, and now we see them all out there. That's the problem in the world today. We're seeing it on Ivy League campuses around the world, this sickness in the Western world, this sickness of these Jew-hating students. Let's call out the problem we've got in the world today, which is fundamental Islamic extremism, whether it's Sunni or Shia. It's infiltrated Western countries like Australia, America, certainly Britain, and it's a sickness. Unless the West stands up against this and calls it out for what it is, then there are dark days ahead for the West.
Michael Danby, the reason that the politicians who are in control now, who are leaders of the country now, Anthony Albanese, Penny Wong, many of the others, Chris Bowen, Tony Burke, Jason Clare, the reason that many of them don't want to call it out, like Michael Kroger has just suggested, and they basically never talk about radical Islamic extremism at all, they don't want to call it out because of votes, because they're worried about losing votes to the Greens. You were in Parliament, Michael Danby. You were federal Labor MP. That's where I got to know you, in Canberra. There is no one there like you anymore who speaks out. They're all silent, every single Labor MP. Why is this?
Well, there's been a passing of the generations. Senator Kimberley Kitching died. She was the future, and unfortunately only 52 and gone. Mike Kelly, Steve Conroy, all of the people who had a bit of backbone on these international issues. Remember when Steve Conroy disagreed with Sam Dastyari over the Chinese and the South China Sea? I doubt if you get anyone to stand on their hind legs and do that these days. But the problem is their failure to speak out has been noticed by these extremist elements. And I can't prove it, but I bet you there's an element of that. Since October 7, the coppers let us get away with it. No one from the government went and made a speech outside the Lakemba Mosque. We never heard from Ed Husick. So why don't we go a step further and go down to the Assyrian Christian Church and stab the bishop? I mean, you've got to draw a line. You've got to show political leadership. You need to stand out there. There don't need to be new laws passed, but the Minister for Justice, the Attorney General, could go and speak in one of those suburbs and say, so far and no further, stop it.
Yeah. Look, this is a huge problem. We're going to keep talking about it throughout the show.
Yeah.
Let's go now to the historic...
Sharri, I wonder...
Yes, Michael Crowe, go
Sorry, I
for
was just going to say, no, just to add to what Michael Danby said. The West is at an inflection point. This is the greatest moral crisis I've seen in the West, I think, in my entire lifetime. The decay of Western society, the failure of national leadership. There is someone senior in this Labor government, Richard Marles. Marles must be horrified. He must be horrified with what this government is doing. Now, of course, as a good Labor man, he stands in solidarity with Penny Wong and Albanese. But Richard, it's time for you to stand up, my friend. It's time for you to show some leadership on these issues. If Richard Marles can't stand up, then there's no hope for the modern Labor Party. With Danby gone, Michael Eason, Mary Alexander, and the other people that Michael
Kimberly
mentioned,
Kitching.
the days of Bob Hawke. I mean, Bill Hartley is rising in his grave, cheering the modern Labor Party. It was never thus when he was around, but it is now.
Just before we turn it into a complete Labor problem, we have seen that New South Wales Premier Chris Minns has been very strong verbally in standing up to anti-Semitism. So I think this particular problem is with federal Labor. I think this is where the issue is, and it's a major issue, and we cover it every single night. But I think there are still elements of the Labor Party who are in the sensible centre. Unfortunately, it's not in Canberra. Let's go to the Donald Trump historic hush money trial now. The former president has been accused of violating a gag order by criticising and intimidating witnesses. He now could be fined for that. Michael, Trump says this case is a sham. What do you think his chances are of getting out of this scot-free?
I'm not sure with a sort of hung jury and a biased judge whether he's got any chance of getting out of it. You don't have to be a Trump supporter to be opposed to the use of law against political opponents. His judgment day should be at the election. And all of these faux legal cases that have been arraigned against him, including this, the most shallow of them all, by an Attorney General in New York who should be dealing with street crime and the terrible rise in murder and violence in New York. So much so that foreign tourists don't want to go to America, don't want to go and visit the Big Apple anymore. So, the wrong emphasis by the justice system in America, the use of law, which is very South American, Venezuelan style against political opponents. And, Donald Trump's not the most beautiful person in the world, but that he paid hush money to a porn star lover, I mean, really, is that should exclude him from being the next president of the United States?
Yeah, it's certainly the weakest case. Before we go, Michael Crowe, I want to ask you about yet another case of eye-watering hypocrisy when it comes to flying private jets. This time, Queensland Premier Stephen Miles has been caught out. The reports say that he used 2 private jets, one for himself and one for Police Minister Mark Ryan. This, according to a report in The Australian. The pair were conducting a regional crime tour of the state. They were flying, according to the media reports, the same routes on Monday, Tuesday and Wednesday, but for some reason they couldn't fly together on the one jet. Michael Crowe, this is just getting ridiculous now. Such a waste of money.
Well, it is. I mean, ask these people, if you were spending your own money, would you have 2 jets? If you're spending your own money, they'd have one jet, or better still, they'd take some kind of alternate transport which is much cheaper. The poor old taxpayer gets beaten over the head every day by these careerist politicians like Miles and others who've never had proper jobs in the private sector. They've never run a business. They think money is free. It's on a money tree. And another disgraceful episode of just, government sort of largesse, spending the public's money as if it's come off a money tree. I mean, shame on him. The good news, Sharri, is he won't be flying much after the election in October because he won't be Premier any longer.
Yeah, but is the opposition bloke much different on policy?
I hope so, and I think so. Certainly a lot tougher on crime, and that's one of the big problems today in Queensland, as we know.
Yeah, exactly. Youth crime, a problem all around the country. Michael Kroger and Michael Danby, thank you both so much. I can't help but think we'd be better off if they were running the country. Now, coming up, Columbia University has caught our attention globally for its extreme anti-Semitism. But what is the former ABC boss Mark Scott going to do about the chance calling for intifada on the Sydney University campus? I'm going to play you the outrageous footage after the break. Welcome back. Well, the University of Sydney is copying the worst of the American Ivy League colleges with its Palestinian sit-ins and horrific anti-Semitism. This chant of intifada was filmed at the University of Sydney today. Intifada, intifada! Intifada, intifada! Intifada, intifada! Thank you. And this chant from last night, where the students say there is only one solution: intifada revolution. Have a listen. There is only one solution. Intifada revolution. There is only one solution. Intifada revolution. Intifada means uprising, and intifadas historically have been violent and have included acts of terrorism. There are students at the University of Sydney, where the Vice-Chancellor is former ABC boss Mark Scott, demanding an intifada. This is an horrendous call for uprising, today and last night, at a time when social unrest is at boiling point. And then the students also chanted this.
Here to make a stand that, this campus is no place for Zionist institutions like the universities and weapons companies that USyd currently partners with. We're here to make a stand that USyd is no place for these Zionist entities, and that the student body and staff here reject Zionism in all of its forms.
Reject Zionism in all its forms. Seriously? Zionism is the support of Israel. Rejecting Zionism is rejecting not only Israel, but Jews and the Jewish homeland. Well, who is supporting this protest at the University of Sydney? The Greens, of course. You remember Green Senator Jenny Leong? She was caught on camera saying the Jews have their tentacles everywhere. Well, she posted a video on social media today.
The fact that they have not cut ties with those military agencies and with the Israeli authorities.
Out there protesting among the students, and federal Green Senator David Shoebridge said on X that USyd students occupy quad lawns in solidarity with Gaza tonight, and he also went down to the protest. But then he went further, and this is seriously outrageous. David Shoebridge shared and posted a video on Instagram where the lyrics say, "It's about time that we globalise the intifada." Watch.
This is for Palestine, Ramallah, West Bank, Gaza. It's about time we globalise the intifada.
That David Shoebridge's Instagram. That is highly irresponsible for a federal Greens politician to have posted that. Highly irresponsible, to say the least. Very clearly, the anti-Semitism of American college campuses, where over 100 protesters have been arrested over the past week, is now being copied by the University of Sydney, where last night students pitched tents that read "From the river to the sea," and you can see that vision there. The students and their supporters like David Shoebridge and Jenny Leong said outright that they're acting in solidarity with the pro-Palestinian protesters at Columbia. But look at the sort of hate that's unfolding in the US.
But critics highlight anti-Semitic hate speech among the demonstrators. New York's mayor pointing to this image, showing a woman with a sign in front of pro-Israel protesters reading Al-Qassam's next targets, a reference to Hamas's military wing.
There were people outside of campus one time with signs that said death to all Jews. That is awful, and nobody should be having to experience that on their campus.
And riot police were called to try and get protests under control.
Police arrested more than 100 protesters who set up the tents in the so-called Gaza Solidarity encampment. Officers used flex cuffs to remove the protesters from campus, charging them with trespassing and disorderly conduct.
And a Jewish university professor claims that he was denied entry to Columbia because the university officials couldn't protect his safety.
I'm a professor here. I have every right to be everywhere on campus, so they are willing to use Jewish brains, but they don't want to let Jewish people in. But I'm not allowed to go on campus where they are allowing the Hamas supporters, and that is a shame.
And classes were cancelled at Columbia on Monday, with lessons now moving to online or hybrid for the rest of the term. The university president is now also under pressure to resign. Now, most of us would look on at that in horror, but not the University of Sydney, which has simply copied the playbook. Their own encampment started last night at 5:30. They pitched tents that read "From the river to the sea." And supposedly responsible adults like David Shoebridge and Member of Parliament Jenny Leong, they think it's a good idea to bring this division to Australia. Now, you all know my views on Israel's war on Hamas, how Israel can't have a ceasefire, it needs to destroy Hamas, which has vowed to repeat its atrocities over and over again. But I respect that others have a different view. And irrespective of our views, we can't control what happens in the Middle East, but we can control what happens here in Australia, at the education institutions our children attend. And bringing this division, this hatred to Australia is only creating an unsafe environment for students. And the reality is that at the University of Sydney, Jewish students no longer feel safe to go on campus. Doesn't it strike you as absurd that the left, that was so obsessed with everyone feeling safe, no one feeling marginalised, to the point that they've added pronouns to their email signatures to make the 1% who've changed genders feel comfortable, yet they don't care at all about how Jews might feel on campus, that they might feel bullied or threatened by signs that say "From the river to the sea," that suggest annihilating the Jewish homeland, or that they might feel bullied by a sign that says "Death to Jews." It's one of the great contradictions of the time we're living in. Those who claim to be tolerant, who are obsessed with identity politics and virtue signalling, showing hatred and bullying towards Jews. Those who preach equality, practicing blatant racism. Those who claim to be fighting for peace, in fact, are actually excusing and justifying violence of the most barbaric kind we've witnessed in the past 75 years. Yet again, the West is crying out for leadership. Now, joining me now to discuss all of this is Liberal Senator and former Australian Ambassador to Israel, Dave Sharma. Dave, thank you so much for your time. Look, firstly, what do you think? What's your reaction to these pro-Palestinian protests that we're seeing at university campuses, mostly in America, but now spreading to Australia?
Well, good evening, Sharri. I've been troubled to see the protests on the Columbia University campus and the clear environment of intimidation and menace that's being directed at Jewish students and Jewish faculty members there. And I do hope that the Columbia University authorities will take a firm stand against this, because whilst students have a right to free expression, they don't have a right to disrupt the studies of others or create an environment that's threatening to other parts of the student body. And I've been alarmed, although not wholly surprised, to see students at Sydney University, unimaginative and unoriginal as they are, copy this sort of tactic and seek to import it into Australia. But I've been horrified to see mainstream politicians, or people who purport to be mainstream politicians, and representatives in the federal parliament and the state parliament from the Greens political party, seemingly egg on and, seek to oxidise this kind of social division and amplify it here in Australia. I don't think, as you said in your introduction, regardless of what your views are on the rights and wrongs of this conflict, I don't think contributing to social division here in Australia is the right way to approach it at all.
Look, after there was the issue that I broke on the show where the professors who were visiting from the University of Tel Aviv were locked in a room with pro-Palestinian protesters, after that you wrote to Mark Scott. Has he replied? Has the University of Sydney given you any explanation for what's going on, or what are they doing to address it?
Look, he has, and I do have I am in relatively frequent contact with Mark Scott because I care deeply about Sydney University and, the welfare of the students there, and especially the Jewish students that have had a rough time. And he did provide quite a fulsome accounting of the steps the university had taken with that event and the investigation that they had undertaken and were continuing to undertake. And he has endeavoured to come back to me with further details, and I do appreciate the open channels I've got with him. I know he doesn't have an easy job. I don't think any Vice-Chancellor does. But I think it's important that, universities and university leadership authorities make sure they adhere to their obligations, their fundamental obligations, to ensure a safe space for all teachers and students of all religions, of all faiths, of all denominations, and make sure that whilst the right to express your opinion is tolerated, it cannot come at the expense of the rights to others, to education or association, or to hold their own political views. And this is what I think we've seen in Columbia University with these protests, is that line has clearly been crossed, and I would hate to see it happen here in an Australian university.
You just mentioned that there are Jewish students having a really rough time at the University of Sydney. We often talk about bullying on social media, and ultimately you can just delete the Twitter app if you want. But Jewish students who are turning up to university campuses every single day, you can't escape this.
No, absolutely. And look, you would know this. Students are either not turning up to campus and trying to do their studies remotely, or if they are, they're doing whatever they need to do to mask their Jewish identity, which should not be. I mean, I'm horrified to think that that's the case. But if they're not wearing any visibly identifiable insignia of the Jewish faith, they're not. If they might have a Star of David necklace, they're not wearing that. They might wear a kippah if they're a man. They're not wearing that. All of that is, I think, terrible as it is, because I think that they already feel a sort of a hostile environment towards them. And of course we've discussed this a number of times on your show, but regardless of what you think of the conflict in the Middle East, it's entirely wrong to be holding Jewish people responsible for the conduct of the State of Israel, whether you think it's right or wrong, just as it would be entirely irresponsible to hold Afghan Australians responsible for the conduct of the Taliban, or Syrian Australians responsible for the conduct of the Bashar al-Assad regime. Once we allow that sort of thing to happen, all we're going to do is provide a mechanism to import every foreign conflict imaginable here into Australia, which will be at the tremendous cost to our functioning and our harmony as a society.
Although it seems like the left doesn't care about deaths anywhere else. They only care about this tiny pocket because it is literally the only Jewish state in the world. Dave Sharma, thank you very much for your time and your insights. So wise as always. Now, the Bruce Lehrmann defamation saga continues to evolve, with lawyers now playing past the parcel with the enormous legal bill. Despite agreeing to pay the costs for Lisa Wilkinson, Network 10 is now trying to argue that Lisa should cough up for any parts of the case that were wasteful. Let's bring in now the Rule of Law Institute of Australia's Chris Merritt. Chris, there are estimates that the costs are between 5 and 6 million. There's now this fight over who should pay for them. How do you think this is going to play out?
Look, I think the penny has finally dropped that Bruce Lehrmann is impecunious. Whatever the damages bill that is laid before him, it's very likely that he won't be able to pay a penny. I think the most likely outcome is bankruptcy. And I think Miss Wilkinson and 10 have probably realised that, and now they're fighting between themselves over who gets left standing when the music stops. This is a massive case, and if this is what a win looks like, it'll cost them, as you said, $5, maybe $8 million. I don't think they'll get much out of Bruce Lehrmann at all.
There's been a suggestion that 10 might want to go find out who his backers were, his private backers behind the scenes, and there might be an argument that the backers should have to front the costs, seeing as their support financially allowed him to bring on this defamation case in the first place. What do you think about that argument?
Look, I think that's logical. If I was 10, if I was Lisa Wilkinson and I was left with a big legal bill, I'd be looking for other options as well. So it doesn't surprise me one little bit. And if that's the case, I expect there'll be a little bit of manoeuvring to try and bring to light exactly what happened.
I mean, 10's owned by Paramount now. They've had redundancies in recent times. So you think they wouldn't be able to really afford such an extraordinary legal bill either?
Look, when you look at this is supposed to be a win. In normal circumstances, they would have most of their legal costs covered. But in these circumstances, where they're up against someone who has been unemployed for some time, notoriously lives in rented accommodation paid for by others, doesn't own a house, I think the assets he is likely to be able to liquidate to pay any damages bill would be very, very limited. I think the biggest debate, apart from who's behind this, who's behind his funding, will be whether he voluntarily goes into bankruptcy or whether 10 pushes him into bankruptcy.
He's not going to launch an appeal, surely.
I would doubt it. I think the Lee judgment closes off the option of a significant damages payout in the event that the Lee victory for 10 is overturned on appeal. So I don't think there's that much in it.
And what about 10 trying to get Lisa to pay for some of the costs? I mean, the judge clearly said that they have to pay her bill, right?
As I said, I think if the penny has finally dropped and it's clear that they're going to be left holding the baby, they'll be looking for all sorts of options to try and minimise their losses. This is a horrific outcome for 10.
Yeah, all right. A horrific outcome and, as you say, yet a win. Right, Chris Merritt, thank you so much for your time.
Quite okay.
Now, coming up after the break, the legal fight between X and the Albanese government escalated today, with lawyers representing Elon Musk arguing that the bishop that was attacked wants videos of the incident kept online. That's after the break. Welcome back. Well, a legal fight between X and the Albanese government was back in court today after the federal court placed an injunction on X, ordering the removal of the footage of the alleged stabbing of a bishop last week. Elon Musk then took to social media to lash the Labor government, which wants to censor the content online. He said the Australian people want the truth, and X is the only one standing up for their rights. Let's bring in now our Wednesday political panel, Labor MP Daniel Molino and National Senate Leader Bridget McKenzie. Welcome to you both. Look, Daniel, the attacks of 9/11 aren't censored. The assassination of JFK isn't censored. So why should the attack here in Australia be removed from the internet?
Well, Sharri, I think, look, firstly, I think that both major parties in Australia support freedom of speech, but there have to be limits. And for me, better precedents than those would be some of the videos that circulated after October 7 and some of the videos of the Christchurch shootings. And a lot of those videos were taken down on X. And there's clearly got to be a line at which material becomes so offensive that it just doesn't meet community norms. I'm very supportive of freedom of speech. I think it's the best way in which we test ideas. And I lean towards more freedom of speech than not. But as I said, there have to be some boundaries. And frankly, I think some of the arguments that Elon Musk's been putting out there just don't stand up.
Bridget, what do you think about this debate?
Well, I don't think complying with Australian law is optional for those companies operating within our borders. But I do find it fascinating and insightful that the bishop himself wants this particular piece of footage to stay online as a warning, as raising awareness that terrorism is amongst us. I mean, Mike Burgess came out this week as the head of ASIO, that terrorist acts are likely to be planned over the next 12 months. So I think it is quite insightful that the bishop himself, the target of the attack, wants to actually see this up as a way of raising awareness of what's actually occurring, has the potential to occur in our own suburbs. So I think that was an interesting piece of evidence. Obviously, for the coalition, we're wanting to see the trial into age verification that the e-Safety Commissioner recommended last year implemented. We don't want our young kids subjected particularly to violent pornography, as they currently are on the internet, not just on X, on a raft of social media platform. And when you see this spate of violence against women by domestic partners, it would suggest that particularly our young men are being poisoned by access to this type of information on social media platforms.
Age restrictions are a great idea. It's just how to enforce it. Now let's have a look at the inflation data today. Inflation in the March quarter has fallen less than expected to an annual rate of 3.6%. Daniel, this is the lowest level since December 2021, getting close to the target band. Is it falling as quickly as your government anticipated?
Well, look, this is the broad trajectory that I think both Treasury and the RBA had forecast. I think if you look at where inflation's come from, if you look back at the December quarter 2022, it was 7.8, and it in fact on a monthly basis was well over 8% in late 2022. So it's come down a long way. We're now 3.6. So we want to get into that 2.2 to 3% band, and in particular now we've set a target of 2.5. So it does have a little bit to go. One thing I think that's really worth noting is that we've achieved that big drop from 7.8 to 3.6 with unemployment still with a 3 in front of it. But look, Sharri, you do draw attention to the fact that inflation does tend to slow down in its trajectory as you get closer to the target. We're seeing this in other countries. We're seeing this in the US, where there was a slight uptick. But, you know, inflation typically, as it's coming down, does tend to get a bit slower as it gets nearer the target. What the RBA has said, though, is that...
Bad maths.
Well, the inflation target is 2 to 3%. We were expecting that by 2025. So 3.6% does seem like it's moving in the right direction. But Bridget, the worry is that you just have to go to the supermarket to see that prices aren't coming down. The cost of living is still so high.
Absolutely, Sharri. I think Australians are paying an enormous cost for Labor's economic mismanagement. What Daniel has failed to tell your viewers is the reason inflation is so high is because the government isn't getting its fiscal spending under control. It's not drawing back and down on government spending. And so the RBA is having to keep interest rates higher for longer than it needs to be. And that means the average mortgage, you're having to pay another $24,000 a year just to make ends meet. Food's gone up 10%, electricity in excess of 16%, and I could go on. Your viewers know it. What Jim Chalmers needs to do in this next budget is actually rein in government spending so that Michelle Bullock can actually do the right thing on interest rates, because economists now are concerned, given inflation is sticking around, that it is homegrown, is that the RBA may be forced to raise interest rates again over coming months, which would just be devastating for homeowners.
Yeah. All right, tomorrow's Anzac Day. Just a quick final thought from both of you, Daniel Molino.
Well, look, I'll be looking forward to going to the Sunshine RSL, just a few hundred metres from where I am right now. It's always a very special morning. And I was also at the Turkish sub-branch of the RSL on Monday night. That's a special event as well, and shows how important Anzac Day is as a reflection of two countries coming together after a bitter battle.
Yeah. Bridget?
Starting the morning at dawn in Wodonga, gunfire brekkie with the boys and girls, and then down to Benalla for 10 a.m. But it's a really important day in our nation's calendar to remember the heroism and the selflessness of our diggers.
Indeed it is. All right, Bridget McKenzie, Daniel Molino, thank you so much for your time. Now, after the break, how 3 academics used Hamas's own data to debunk their casualty figures. I'll speak with one of them next. Statistically impossible. That's how 3 Australian academics have described the Gazan death count. They say that the claims that women and children make up 70% of the more than 30,000 claimed casualties since the war began is untrue. One of those academics is Professor Louis Stone. He's got decades of experience working as a biomathematician at Tel Aviv University and now at RMIT, and he joins me live. Louis, how did you come to this conclusion, and can you tell us what you do think the Hamas or the Gaza, death toll is?
Sure. Thank you for having me, Sharri. We work on population modelling and in warfare, in epidemics, and all sorts of things. So we've had a lot of experience doing that. And what we normally find is we get all sorts of data sets, and it's just a mess usually. And to find whether there's been manipulations, it usually means you have to sort out, is there a sign of manipulation or is it rubbish? And this is the kind of situation we're in here because the data's not so hot. So firstly, before I answer your question directly... Yes. Go on, yeah.
Well, can you explain what you mean by that?
Claim...
Go ahead, Louis.
You'll get the flavour very soon, but we're dealing with Hamas data, which is intrinsically problematical. The first few weeks, maybe it was reasonable, but the quality just got worse and more erratic, and you'd see patterns that just didn't make sense. And so it took a lot of teasing to untangle it and to figure out what's it really saying. So on the other hand, since day one, since October, or day 2, since October the 8th, Hamas has been chanting that 70% of all deaths are women and children. So where did they get that number from? What does it mean? Because that number is shaping how the whole world sees the Gaza war. So the fact is, it's just not true. It's not relevant number anymore. And there's a statistical saying: in God we trust. All others must bring data, but we don't have good data from them. So, so what we had to do is basically we find that the true number of women and children who were killed in this year was 42% of all deaths. Now that's a lot. But it's a lot less than a lot of wars, a lot of other wars. And it's far less than 70%. Where did they get the number 70%? Because 70% women and children, you would expect, if there was indiscriminate shooting and bombing in the population, you'd expect 70% of women and children to be dead because there are 75% women and children in the population. So we find already for this year that's 42%. Okay. Last year it's similar, but we won't go into that.
We have run out of time, but thank you very much. It's a fascinating paper. Thank you for your time. Now, just very quickly, tomorrow afternoon at 4 o'clock in Sydney, I'm interviewing Brendan O'Neill from Spiked Online and The Spectator. If you'd like to come, you can find information at the Australian Jewish Association's social media. Otherwise, I'll see you here tomorrow at 8 o'clock. And here's Paul Murray.